About 10 years ago, while driving, I was listening to one of the call-in programs on radio when the host asked, "Do you think it is possible to forgive someone if they have not said they were sorry?" I would say about 90% of the respondents said no. I was rather bothered by this and preached at an appropriate weekend mass about what I had heard, how wrong I thought the respondents were, and summoned my hearers to unconditional forgiveness. Father Henry's book knocked the winds of self-righteousness out of my sails. He had me rethinking this whole business of forgiveness and made me realize that I jumped too quickly to the end point, forgiveness. It reminded me of seminary days when we used to make fun of him by mimicking one of his classroom expressions. How do you get from here to there? The business of getting from here to there regarding forgiveness is a complex one, and clerics in particular will do well to have a careful reading of his first and very fine book. Let me start by saying how naive we priests, ministers can be in preaching on forgiveness. The refusal or inability to forgive is the most frequent sin heard in confession. I have also noticed in the dailies how easily pastors exhorted their congregations and grieving relatives to forgive after major undeserved human loss, as if forgiving is second nature. There is no mention of any time frame, as Father Henry mentions in his book, how long forgiveness will take, how to cope with the ebb and flow of memories, how we get the whole person to move from one stage to the next, such that the person who forgives is different from the one who at one time could not. I have always found this lacuna in preaching psychologically and spiritually harmful. Even the Bible does not operate like that. We see this above all in the cursing Psalms. "O God, break their teeth in their mouth." Psalm 58 verse 6. "May his children be fatherless and his wife a widow." Psalm 109 verse 9. "How blessed will be the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks." Psalm 137 verse 9. I remember several years ago at one of our theology conferences in Grenada, Faces of Jesus in the Caribbean, a Grenadian woman got up and with such anger declared, "They built a monument for the American soldiers by the airport, but they did not build any for our soldiers, our people who died." We need to be very realistic about major trauma before we can talk about forgiveness. There is major hurt there still, as there is a lot of pain over the 1990 coup. I don't think we do much in the parishes to bring hurting people together to find out how they overcome deep wounds. I am sure our preaching and counseling would be enriched by facing the raw pain that the psalmist dared to face. An issue that Father Henry does not deal with in depth, but one which arises from his book, is how does one forgive oneself of serious wrongdoing. He touches on it with a moving story of Lomax and Takashi, and the latter's attempt at personal restitution. I remember a story told me by my first cousin's husband about an elderly friend of theirs who lived through the Holocaust era. She was on a train and her baby was crying. The Nazi officer shouted at her saying, "Throw that baby out the train," and she threw her baby out the window. How does such a person forgive herself? I think there is a kind of naivety in Catholic retreat programs regarding the evil we have done. When I was in Berkeley, California on my sabbatical, I was rather uncomfortable with the retreat director's presumption of our niceness. Here were these people who didn't know a thing about me or us, telling us how nice we were, how precious we were in God's sight, and how loved by God. It seems priests and nuns don't do terrible things. But there is a long tradition of penance and pilgrimage in the Catholic Church. Pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, Spain, has suddenly increased in recent years after centuries of decline from the Reformation onward. Must penance ever stop? John Paul, in his apostolic exhortation on reconciliation and penance, says the Christian life is a penitential life. Do we ever stop making penance for sins committed? Is it psychologically unhealthy to do so? It seems that is what Takashi was doing for his crimes against Lomax. I recently received a request from the Ministry of Justice. The Probation Department wants us to partner with them in offering community service to offenders in lieu of sentencing. I think this is a ripe opportunity for us to walk the talk, that is our preaching, by helping with the rehabilitation of offenders. It will be a form of penance for them, but it may also be an opportunity for us to see how forgiveness functions in their lives. While I have a great deal more respect for conditional forgiveness and intend to preach about it more, I find myself increasingly confronted with an issue that demands unconditional forgiveness. I am speaking of Alzheimer's or dementia. Whatever personality flaw that plagued a person in his or her earlier years only becomes worse as dementia increases. If they were jealous, they become more so. If insecure, they become increasingly so. The hardest part is not to take things personally. In coping with demented relatives, the proverb, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me," is proved wrong. The accusations, the anger, the frequency of them all make it hard to be detached and forgiving. Adults just cannot handle when their parents curse them, are violent towards them, and even leave the house in the unguarded moment, slipping into the street stark naked for all the neighbors to see. It can be the final humiliation. One caregiver told me when Alzheimer's gets worse, you meet a different person each day. The mother or father you saw yesterday is not the one you see today. What else can one think of at such a stage but unconditional forgiveness, biblical or otherwise? And it's forgiveness for what is not done with malice. In a sense, the person has done no wrong, if wrongness implies deliberate intent. Yet it feels so much like a conscious wrong that the only decent response is empathy and unconditional forgiveness. I would like to make a note before leaving the topic about unconditional forgiveness without touching slightly on the parable of the prodigal son. It is the most popular parable in talking about repentance and unconditional forgiveness, and it is often used in retreats in conjunction with Rembrandt's painting on the same theme. I think the father does show his son unconditional love, but I do not think the younger son is repentant. I think he is still somewhat a crook. He plays on his father's compassion. It is not contrition for his wastefulness that draws him back to his father, but his belly and shame. Of all the animals he ends up feeding are pigs, an animal considered unclean by Jews. He is hungry, but he does not ask for food. Pride is his bedfellow. One can hear the dramatist in him. He plans his re-entry with well-chosen words. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as one of your paid servants." When he meets his father, it is his father who runs to him, clasps him in his arm, and kisses him. He utters his planned contrition, but conveniently leaves out, "Treat me as one of your paid servants." But I think it's so God stuff. He begins the work of reconciliation with us, though we are not fully contrite, like a philandering husband who returns to his wife, knowing she will accept him because she still loves him, he no longer having the money, the stamina, nor the good looks to continue his wayward life. This is why Father Henry's mention of Romans 5:8 is such a punchline for me. It was while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Reconciliation does not start after forgiveness. It is granted, but even while it is still being worked out. In concluding, I would like to mention a developing discipline referred to as comparative theology, using the insights of another religion after careful and detailed study of it to add clarity and expansion to one's own. We are living in a world that is learning to be religious interreligiously, a term first coined by Jacques Dupuy and expanded into an entire book by Peter Pan. Globally, interreligious marriages are increasing, and the global village has now put Christianity and formerly little-known religions face-to-face with one another. It would therefore be enriching, starting in our own context, to compare Hindu and Muslim notions of forgiveness with the Christian one, or, more in keeping with the thrust of Henry's book, which is not essentially theological, with the Buddhist understanding of compassion or karuna and emptiness or sunyata. How can the Bodhisattva of the Mahayana Buddhist tradition relieve the horror of tragic memories by the practice of karuna and the search for sunyata? In what ways might the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions be shades of compassion and emptiness? There is too a need for healing among religious groups in Trinidad, both on the intra- and interdenominational level. There are past hurts, resentments, and misconceptions that need to be addressed. The interreligious uneasiness we experience at present is not only due to politics, but also due to each religion jealously guarding its own identity and turf, looking with suspicion at any attempt at a vulnerable, genuine, non-threatening encounter with the other. Here the IRO has the potential to be prophetic, but it seems to me to have lost its bearings. It is not getting out its message to the wider community, including its own religious communities. Genuine interfaith encounter has the potential to point a way forward for pluralist societies in forging a common ethic. Our problems are too deep and debilitating for any one religion to face them alone. Issues of forgiveness and reconciliation and peacemaking must be done interreligiously.